Hey friends. I Something's been on my mind today and it sort of arose, I suppose, out of a conversation yesterday or kind of a series of conversations over the last couple of days with my wife primarily. It's also come up as it often does when there's a theme running through my life in other conversations and with other people. Um but the thrust of it is when you do inner work, I'll use that blanket term to mean anything from therapy to meditation, anything from working on the psychological structures that that comprise us, that to some degree um, compel us, our compulsive behaviors, until we can unravel them, see through them, and dissolve them, all the way up to spiritual experiences. As we do that work, there's a fair amount of recognition that takes place regarding where some of our programming may have come from. It can come from our culture, right? There's such a thing as cultural programming. The culture we live in creates a certain lens through which the individuals within it see reality. That's almost the definition of culture. From a certain angle, you could almost define culture that way. The way a group of individuals sees the world. There's biological conditioning, right? Our physical body, the way our brains and bodies respond to stimuli, is a form of conditioning. It has an effect on our consciousness. And it's not something that has to remain completely compulsive or unconscious, but to some degree it's pretty robust. Just realizing that it's the case doesn't dissolve it, and sometimes it doesn't even move it. It just becomes something we're aware of, but it's still happening. um, there's conditioning that's a little more specific that can kind of happen within a family, right? Like my relationship to my father, my relationship to my mother, my relationship to my siblings. All these things, our early life imprinting stuff, creates grooves in our psyche. It's the way we are. And this is all kind of a preamble to the thing that has come up for me over the last couple of days, which is that we we learn all this stuff. We start to see all this stuff. We begin to understand our programming. Hopefully, we do as we do some of this work. And that's great. And that's actually, I would say, kind of important. You kind of have to go through that phase, because otherwise, because the phase prior to that is a phase where all that programming is really just kind of running us. We don't really know that it's even programming. We just think this is the way the world is, or this is just the response I'm having is the only appropriate, the only possible response to this situation or whatever it is. And so we kind of have to, it's really helpful, and it's kind of an important phase to go through a process of deconstructing that conditioning and beginning to analyze it, beginning to objectify it, beginning to be able to say, this is not me, this is conditioning. And to whatever extent I can locate the source of that conditioning. I mean, I think sometimes there's no obviously 100% accurate way to discern that, or a way to necessarily verify it, but you get pretty strong impulses. You get a pretty clear sense when you're on the scent of it. It's like, okay, there's usually some kind of like, it resonates that we either recall an experience, or we recall a relationship, or we recall something that gave us the impression that we now compulsively carry everywhere. So that's the process. And it's like, as I keep saying, it's important. It's really, um, it can be really revelatory. I've certainly had a lot of deep insights show up that way. I feel like I've had a lot of moments of relatively powerful release where I'm able to say, okay, now that I see where this came from and this is not me, I feel more free of it. I don't feel like it determines me or my reality anymore. But that phase can go on forever. That phase of analyzing our conditioning, realizing where it came from, seeing that it's not just the way we are, and because it's the way reality is, or the way our human essence is, and that rather our behavior, our thinking patterns in our thinking and our behavior are the product of our conditioning. That process can go on essentially forever. We can always find another thing. We can always identify another moment in our past, or another relationship, another imprinting experience from our early life that explains something about the way we are now. And again, it's not that that's not important. It's just that I think it's also important, assuming a certain fluency with that process. In other words, assuming that someone kind of knows how to do that and is not so compulsive, or so still run by their conditioning that they can't, that we can't even take that step back and objectify it, right? Assuming that we can do that, and that we've gotten relatively competent at that type of inner work, there comes a point where we have to say, this work may be important in certain instances, but what's even more important, and I think this is something that is happening to me as I age, is to simply take responsibility for all of it right now, and actually reclaim it all. It's not that I say it's me, because it's obviously not. It's my conditioning. But I say it's mine. And when I say it's mine, I take responsibility for it. In other words, if I've learned through self-reflection and therapy that I'm the way I am in this type of situation, or I have a certain self-image because of my father, that's great, and that's good to know, and that is valuable information, and there may be some powerful release and some empowerment that comes from knowing that. But my experience teaches me that ultimately, knowing that doesn't fully do the job of changing that, if it's something I want to change. And that really, the only way I can get serious about making changes is by saying, wherever it came from, and whatever the cocktail of influences and conditioning patterns is, they're mine, and I take responsibility for them. I take responsibility for what I am, and for what I do, and for what I want to become, and for what I want to do. There's no there's no way out by simply understanding it a little bit better when we get to that point. When we get to the point where we've gotten good at understanding it, the way out no longer involves understanding it a little bit better. It involves taking responsibility and doing what we want to do, actually making the changes and or accepting ourselves the way we are, accepting certain things about ourselves, or embracing certain things but knowing that they're on a journey and taking responsibility for getting there. And I think, the why this is coming up for me is that I've had a series of insights along these lines come up recently. I've had some stuff where I've seen, oh, I think I see some new, I think I have a new, slightly new take on a pattern that's been with me for a long time. And it's not that that's not a great insight or that it's not a valuable insight on some level, but there's also part of me, again, as I age and I can reflect on a longer and longer history of doing precisely this work. There comes a point where it's like, it doesn't really matter where it came from anymore. It's mine now. And especially now that I know that it's not me, I've disidentified from it. You can't actually take responsibility if you're still identified with it, because it's running you. It is responsible for you. You can't be responsible for it until you see, this is not me. I've objectified it enough to know this compulsive behavior is not me. But that, if that doesn't make it magically go away, which that would be really great, and therapists would have really satisfying lives if all they had to do was get a client to have an insight, and then they would be free of the trauma that issue ever caused, right? That would make being a therapist really fun. You'd be a world changer every single day. But as we all know, that insight often is not enough to make the full shift. So then there's that step, that next step, and I think I'm encouraging myself to take that next step of owning it all, letting it all, accepting it as mine, because now I can work with it. I'm not trying to explain. There's a mild evasiveness in trying to explain it. Especially once we get good at that process, it's like now attributing the things that I do, attributing my compulsive behaviors to the influences that they may or may not have stemmed from, becomes a way of actually evading the fact that this is my behavior right now. Do I want that? Do I not want that? What do I want my behavior to be? What do I want my thinking to be? What do I want my habits to be? So this is me pep talking myself and giving myself the I think the challenge of not indulging in that process, because it's like, you'll know when the time is right for that process, and that's the most important thing to do. I'll be great at doing it. I've gotten good at it, but I don't know that that process is actually going to serve me with where I am right now and where I need to go. So So yeah, that's what showed up for me today. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you soon.